Hi everyone, my name is Iman and welcome to episode number 5 of PreDental Talk presented by crackdat.com. This episode is a little special because we are going to be doing a couple interviews about dental school interviews. So obviously the fall is here and some people are starting to get notifications and invitations for their dental school interviews. So I thought it'd be great to hop on and do a couple of chats with both a dental student, a D1 right now, and another pre-dental student like me who's going through the virtual interview process. And we can hear from both of them, gain their perspective on things, and hopefully take some advice that might help you guys out in your dental school interviews. So the first guest I have is Isabel. She's a D1 at UPenn and one of my fellow coworkers and friends here at Crack the DAT. And you might know her because she did some vlogs for us on the YouTube channel and on our website, crackdat.com. And she actually did 2 full episodes about dental school interviews, one of which she talked about her own personal experience, and another one where she interviewed 2 other dental students where they gave their advice on dental school interviews. So you can go check those out either by searching crackdat on YouTube, finding our YouTube channel and watching there, or you can go to crackdat.com, go to webinars and blogs, go to that tab, and then under there you can go check out the vlogs and you can hear her perspective on that. So first, we're going to kick it to her interview. Hi, Isabel. Good to see you. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know it's a busy time because you're just starting your first couple of weeks of dental school. So could you maybe just tell us a bit about how that's been so far?
Yeah. So I started 2.5 weeks ago now. We've taken our first quizzes and like all of our classes basically. We have a first exam coming up a week from Monday. So things are really picking up. I like to say it's like all your undergrad sciences, like at 100 miles per hour. You're in class from 8 to 5, you have an hour for lunch, and it's just a lot of information, but so far so good. It's interesting and it's exciting. So
Awesome. Yeah, I know you said that you have a Zoom class after this or an online class after this. So is it kind of a hybrid model now or is it all online?
yeah, so Penn's actually doing hybrid, and I don't think that's different dental schools throughout the country are doing it differently. I have friends who are completely online until January at least. But we are going in at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. We get separated into like cohorts, so groups of 30, 35 kids. And we go in at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. And then we're rotating. We get different groups and we do preclinical. So we do like sim lab. And so that's in addition, that's like totally separate from the groups when you go into class. So you go into that once, it depends on your rotation, but like once every 2 weeks. And then we're also going to start DAU clinics, so like when we're assisting third years, and that starts also totally separate from both the 2 other going in. So it depends on the week, but we'll go in probably around like 3 times a week, starting in a week and a half, I think.
Well, that's definitely interesting and perhaps something maybe we could talk about in the future because I know today I invited you on because about a year ago you were in the same position that I'm in now and perhaps a lot of the listeners are right now as well, in that they've submitted their application and they're preparing to get ready for interviews. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit about your process in terms of last summer when you applied and how long it took you to hear back and that whole thing.
Yeah. So I know coronavirus might be affecting things slightly differently than what I experienced, but I took my DAT June 10th. The application opened for me June 1st. So I had access to all the questions, like the official application. So I probably spent from June 1st, every time I was taking a study break, I was doing something on the application, filling out like background or something. So I was doing like hard studying like all day, every day. I took like 1 day off for like 3 weeks. And then I took the DAT June 10th, submitted my application officially like the 20th of June, I think. And then I had a committee letter for recommendation. So that wasn't submitted until July, maybe like 3rd. So, and they don't review your application until it's entirely complete. So that was like the last piece of my application was when my committee letter for my recommendation got submitted. So I was probably done mid-July, I would say. I would definitely recommend getting in as early as possible. With that being said, obviously don't submit an incomplete application. But getting it in early is important. With that being said, I also have friends like who I'm at school with now at Penn who didn't submit their applications until October, and who got into grade schools. They just heard back really late. And there's obviously less interview dates available at that time. So it is a more stressful process if you do wait. So it's kind of a gamble that it's up to the person. But I started hearing back August, honestly. Like I started hearing back like a month after about interviews. But then I heard back, I didn't interview after November. So I had all my interviews from September to November. And then I did all my acceptances on the 5th of December, which is like the first day that you can get accepted. But that's also like, there are schools that interview past December, and I think coronavirus is going to be different. And there are people who get accepted past December. So it's all kind of like a game, and it's really hard to generalize people's experiences because it's all dependent on when you submit your application, who you're applying to, when they're interviewing, how many dates they offer. Some schools offer dates every weekend. Some schools, because they want smaller groups of interviewees. Other schools only offer 3 dates the entire interview or the entire application cycle. So it's really dependent, and I think that's why it's kind of hard to generalize. I mean, I can talk about my personal experience, but it's hard to generalize to like what to expect.
Right. No, I mean, that's something I definitely learned from doing these podcasts. As I've talked to a couple of different dentists, and, some people apply to a bunch of schools and some people only apply to 2 and earlier, later. So there's a lot of variation, but like you said, you have to know how to play the game. So I think it's definitely, if you can do what you can do to make yourself an advantage by applying earlier and stuff, it's definitely good advice. So in terms of when you get the invites for the interviews, were there, I guess different schools probably have different things, but what were the steps in addition to preparing yourself, but maybe perhaps supplemental applications or other forms you have to fill out? Were there any kind of logistical things you had to sort out before then?
Yeah, so you don't get interviews until you submit your secondaries if schools have secondaries. So
Right.
yeah, so that's all pre-interview. And then once you get the interview, I'm prepared a lot for interviews, but not specific schools. Most schools kind of tend to ask. I use Student Doctor Network, and they have a ton of interview questions there. Some of them weren't helpful, but they were helpful in the sense of I don't think I was asked 100% of what Student Doctor Network said that the school asked in any of my interviews. But they were really helpful to just like think about questions, to come up with answers, to practice just thinking on your feet. So I use that a lot to prepare. Trying to think what else. I talked to everyone. I talked to my parents. I talked to my friends. I told them to ask me random questions. And I asked, I went to the career center at my college. I think it's just really important to talk as much as you can, as silly as that sounds, just practice your answers and practice your official answers, because you can have your why you want to be a dentist answer that you tell your friends, you tell your parents or whatever, but being able to really cohesively say that out loud in a professional format that sounds good is difficult, and you really have to work on formulating that opinion and formulating what you want to say to specific questions. So just practice, I would say, is what I did.
Right. So I guess you were saying, so online you would find on SDN specific, were you kind of separating before you did a global review of interviews in general, and then when each date approaches, you'd have a specific approach for each school, or was it kind of a mix? Or can you tell me about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I did general questions. I just kind of Googled. I didn't really spend a ton of time on SDN with regards to general questions. I kind of just Googled what questions can you be asked in an interview, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had my primary application printed out. So the question would be tell me a time when you've been empathetic. And then to jog my memory, I would look at my primary and be okay, these are what I did. This is a really cool example. I wrote that down. And then I kind of wrote down 5 things that I've done in my life that are really versatile stories, and just had those in my back pocket that could come up in a variety of different cases that I would want to elaborate, because ultimately every question you could ask in an interview, you want to have something to support it. You can't be I'm empathetic, and they're that doesn't say anything. Anyone can say that. You have to support it with a personal experience. So I did that first. So I definitely just went over general. I wanted to figure out what I wanted to highlight about myself that just didn't necessarily come out a ton in my application that I wanted to come out in my interview. And then when I got specific schools, then I went to SDN to look at the specific school. There's like a forum that people post like what they were asked. And then I would write down those questions, jot down a few notes, and then have a friend or my mom or whoever ask me the question. And then I would try to talk about it. And then I'd be like, okay, what did you think about that point? And they would say, okay, well, you didn't seem convincing on this point. Like, let's try elaborating more on that. Or I was like, okay, you're right. Like, and then I try again. So that was like how I kind of prepared generally for interviews and then for specific schools.
Right. So in terms of if you did multiple interviews at different schools, were there any questions? I mean, obviously why dentistry seems like it might be, but like, were there other questions that you found were asked repeatedly, or certain themes that schools kept hitting on that would be good to prepare in specific?
Yeah, so definitely why dentistry, shadowing experiences, like what you've done to explore the career, extracurriculars, empathy. I got a lot of questions about empathy. Like tell me an example of time you've been empathetic. I got some ethical questions. Ethical questions came up in a lot of my interviews. Phrased differently. Some gave me scenarios versus others just said like, tell me an ethical dilemma or something. Student Doctor Network honestly was really helpful. They didn't, like I said, there was a ton of questions, but I was prepared for the ones that were like weird for schools. They were posted beforehand. So I never went into an interview blindly, if that makes sense.
Okay. So there were no, like in your experience, so you're never blindsided at all by any of the questions, like you felt you prepared well, or were there still things that you didn't expect in your experience?
So in my personal experience, I also really like interviewing. Like I really like to talk to people. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the profession. And I think they're also looking for people who are outgoing and empathetic and people because that's part of the career. So I think if you are like that and you're like me, I think that you don't necessarily get thrown off, because also goes back to the whole, I had 5 experiences in my back pocket. So regardless of what they asked me and I hadn't touched on one of them, I could kind of, it's an art, honestly, interviewing is an art, and you can kind of spin or work with something and taking a pause and being like, okay, like, let me think about how I can formulate this experience I had into an answer to this question. So I don't think I was ever really thrown off. But I do think that some of the questions in the Student Doctor Network were super bizarre. And that really helped me, because not even that I was asked that specific question, it helped me because I was like, okay, this is a bizarre question. I don't know how I respond to that. I'd think about it for 2 days, come up with an answer. But through that process, I learned that art of being like, wow, this is a really weird question. I'm going to think about it. And this is how I got to my process. So then it became more natural when I was actually in the interview setting.
So speaking of the interview setting, I was watching your different blog posts, and you were talking about the one experience when there was one applicant who forgot his photo out of the 8 that were there. So I was wondering, did it make a difference to you? Because actually, well, obviously this year it might be, who knows how it's going to be with virtual interviews, but if there's a lot of people in the chat or not, and then definitely in years future, it might be useful advice. But to you, did it make a difference either being in a small group or a large group? And how did the presence of others affect how you did it?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So I had kind of I'm going to go 2 polar opposites. So I had one experience where I was split up into like a mini group, but the entire interview day was like absurd. It was like 100 something kids, which honestly, I think jaded my perspective of the school more than it did of my like interview experience, just because I felt like I didn't get to like really get to know students that were there or faculty that were there. I was kind of just like, we were herded from thing to thing. And I really liked that school, but if I had just known about that school if I had known nothing about that school outside of the interview day, I would have been really turned off. And the interview like kind of negatively affected my opinion of it. Just because I don't know, part of the interview is like you're trying to read them as much as they're trying to read you. So when you have a massive group of people, it's way harder to see if you vibe with the other kids that they're there, like to really ask them questions, because you also feel like you're kind of always like trying to like one up the next guy, which is a weird dynamic. And then for small group stuff, one thing I will say, and this is hilarious because I remember people telling me this when I was interviewing, and I was like, yeah, right, whatever. Like there's so many dental schools and so many people applying. Like I'm not going to see these people ever again, but you do. And that's really important, because not only are the people, the interviewee, like the interviewers watching you interact with the other candidates, you also are probably going to be with them in another school, and they're going to have an opinion of you if you're rude or if you are really nice or if you're cool, and that could be your potential colleague, your potential classmate for the next 4 years, and you don't want to ever like start off on the wrong foot for no reason because you were just nervous about an interview.
Yeah, I mean, it'll definitely be interesting to see how that changes this year, obviously with the virtual stuff. But yeah, listen, I know you're running really short on time, so I'll start to wrap it up right now. And I'd encourage anybody listening to this, if they want to hear more on Isabel's perspective, she posted 2 great videos. One of them was her kind of outlining through her interview process and information about that. And she did also interview with 2 other dental students. So that's great. Check that out on Crack the DAT's YouTube page. To close it, do you have any general things you'd like to share with the audience or any advice real quick before you head out?
No, yeah, definitely feel free to reach out. I'm happy to go further into anything else or just answer more questions. I know it's short on time.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it, and I'll let you go right now. So thank you again, and have a good day.
Yeah, thanks. See ya.
Thank you to Isabel for doing that podcast with me. I know it was a bit tight for time because she had a class right after we finished that interview. So best of luck in school. And if you, the listener, are interested in hearing more from her perspective, she did 2 awesome vlog episodes, as I mentioned. You can either find those on the Crack Dat YouTube page, or you can go to crackdat.com, same place you'll find my podcast under the webinars and blogs tab. You can find her vlogs where she did those 2 great episodes on dental school interviews, so check those out. Now, obviously this cycle is a bit different because there's a lot of virtual interviews with dental schools. And as a pre-dental student myself, I wanted to know more about the process before I got started, which is why I reached out to my next guest, Lauren, a fellow pre-dental student who had a couple virtual interviews before me. And she was able to give her insight on her experiences and give a couple of tips and advice. So it's definitely a great listen to hear her perspective on that. And since we did that interview, I experienced my first virtual interview, which is going to segue into my first of 2 announcements. We are going to be releasing a complimentary blog post to this podcast where you can hear some bonus tips from me and Lauren regarding virtual interviews specifically. If you go to the same place you find the podcast on crackdat.com under the webinars and blogs tab, you'll find a corresponding blog entry to this episode where me and Lauren will answer a couple of quick fire questions on virtual interviews. So some bonus content that you will not hear on this podcast. Go to crackdat.com, webinars and blogs tab, check out the blog, and you can read the other blog entries too, because Lauren's done a great job in writing some advice on the DAT, some advice on applications, and a couple of posts that correspond with my episodes. If you're tired of hearing my voice, you can read her writing. So check those out. Second announcement is that we have a new discount code, 10% off your purchase at crackdat.com, which is already the most affordable and most effective online tool to help you study for your DAT. We're going to change it up and make the code interview. So if you use the code interview at crackdat.com as you make your purchase, you can get 10% off, making a great deal even better. So go check that out. Now, without further ado, let's pass it on over to Lauren. Yeah, I'll give the floor to you to give a little quick intro. Tell us about yourself.
So hi, thank you, Iman, for having me on the podcast. My name is Lauren. I'm originally from Florida, and I'm currently a senior in college, and I'm applying to dental schools this cycle.
Definitely one reason why I wanted to have you on was because this podcast is going to be about the dental school interviews, and we can get advice from people of previous years, but clearly this year is quite different from years past in the fact that many of these interviews are going to be done virtually, just like this interview right here. So
Right.
I was just wondering, maybe we could start off by just talking about your experience so far, because I know you've done a couple. Is this kind of a surreal experience, or have you ever experienced something like this, some kind of virtual interview where they're asking you questions like this right now?
It is very different. I'm used to using Zoom and using different video conferencing platforms now because that's how all my classes are being offered. So I have some experience with that and with the breakout rooms, but I've never had a full interview and a full orientation via Zoom or any other virtual platform. So it really has been an interesting experience and a little bit of a learning curve too.
Definitely, definitely. So, I mean, I definitely imagine that for different schools, the feel will be different. But I was wondering if you could tell us so far in your experience, what is it structured like? Are there multiple students with you or are they one-on-one? If you could just share your experiences on that.
Yeah, so based on my experience so far, it has been one-on-one for the interviews, though the number of interviewers does vary. I'm not being interviewed with other applicants, so it's just me, and usually they do that in a breakout room or something of that nature. But for the overall part of the presentation, where you're learning about the school or hearing from the current students about the curriculum and about their experiences, that has been with the other applicants who are interviewing that day. So you do get the chance to see everyone and be with everyone. And then during your own interview, you're just by yourself and with your interviewers.
Interesting. So I was wondering like what the etiquette would be when you're doing these kind of like question panels or when you're with all these other students. Do you like put in the chat that you want to ask a question or do you just like wave until they notice you? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it depends. Usually you just unmute yourself and ask the question,
Okay.
and that has usually worked out fine. But I know some schools want you to put it in the chat, and others want you to use the raise hand function on Zoom,
Hmm.
which is like you're raising your virtual hand, and that way they know that you have a question and they can call on you that way.
Yeah, so interesting. Did you find it to be more or less intimidating with more people interviewing you, or did kind of the fact that it was virtual take some of the edge off, or tell me about that?
I did find it a little bit more intimidating when more people were interviewing, but not too bad. Really, the interview is a conversation, and they just want to get to know you. So I just tried to view it that way and from that lens, so that I would be less intimidated going in. And doing it virtually is definitely different. You don't get the experience of being face to face, and you also have the added concern. There was a little concern in the back of my mind that maybe my internet would go out or maybe the people I live with would be loud and would interrupt the interview. But so far everything's been fine, and I know that the interviewers do try to be really understanding because this is new for them too, and they've never really done virtual interviews before either. So it goes both ways, and everyone's just trying to figure it out and make the experience as good for you as possible.
Awesome. Awesome. So I know that it must have been hard to come in with a set of expectations. I mean, you can only do so much preparation, given advice from previous year students and previous stories about dental interviews. But now that you've gone through a couple, is there anything that particularly surprised you or you think would be good to know for future people?
I was really just surprised by how good of a sense you can get about a certain school through Zoom or another virtual platform because I went into it not sure how much I would really be able to learn about the school, not being able to be physically there and physically interacting with people. But the schools have really made a really good effort to make sure that you can ask your questions and learn about the school and just talk to your interviewers and learn about their experiences. So I was really pleasantly surprised with how much you can still get out of a virtual interview.
Hmm. Hmm. That's awesome. But in terms of, so it's definitely great that you can cultivate these kinds of conversations with the interviewers, but in regards to other applicants themselves, are you talking to them at all, or is it really just the question period where you don't talk to each other, but they ask questions?
So far in my experience, I haven't had the chance to talk too much with the other applicants.
Yeah.
You hear everybody's questions, and often they'll have a little introduction period where you can hear about everyone's background and where they're from. But I haven't had the chance to have too much, interaction directly with the applicants, which I know normally you would get in an
Yeah.
in-person interview.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's almost, it sounds like it'd be one of the more interesting experience of interviews to go to the different cities and get to talk to these people. And
Definitely.
it's kind of like like field trips or like, I don't know, some kind of conference where you get to talk to people. But definitely, new experiences, and hopefully, it sounds like they're doing the best they can to adapt to the current situation. And
Yes,
who
they're
knows, maybe,
definitely adapting.
yeah, yeah. And you might see some of these people next year when you get hopefully back to some real classes and stuff, but who knows what the future holds. All right, awesome, Lauren. I really appreciate you coming in and chipping in this insight. Definitely useful to people applying this cycle. who knows how useful it'll be next year. Hopefully things will start to change, but we never know. So we might be listening to this interview for this year only. We might be listening to it for 5 years. Who knows?
It might be.
Let's pray. Let's pray and hope that it'll be for this cycle. But before you head off, is there any general advice you would give to anybody going through the same process as us right now?
Yeah, I would advise people to just do your best and relax and know that this is just one more aspect of your application and one more step of the process. And also just do what you can to feel prepared. So for me, it really helped me to do a test run of my video and my audio. If you've never used Zoom before, you can call a friend and just make sure that everything's working. So going into it feeling prepared really helps. So yeah, just do your best and know that it'll work out in the end.
Awesome. Yeah, well, this is great advice, for me also, because I have some interviews coming up. And so thank you for sharing with me, and for hopefully the rest of the students listening that are going through the process this year. We can take some stuff away from it, and perhaps we'll see each other on the Zoom chat. And
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren, again for coming on to the podcast, sharing your tips. And as I mentioned in that break, if you want some bonus content, some extra advice, quick fire questions that both me and Lauren answered after doing some virtual interviews, go to crackdat.com, webinars and blogs tab, go check out the blogs, and you can find the most recent blog entry. Me and Lauren answering some quick fire questions on virtual dental school interviews. So go check that out, enjoy, and hopefully we can help you if you have not done any interviews yet, or if you're not even applying the cycle, whatever the deal is. If you want some advice on those interviews, feel free to check out that blog post, and check out the other blog posts too. They're great. Again, before I go, I'll remind you of the 10% discount code. We're switching it up this month, and we are making it interview in honor of our dental school interviews. So if you use the code interview at checkout at crackdat.com, you can save 10% on what's already a great deal, the best bang for your buck, and a great effective study tool online for the DAT. So go check out crackdat.com, use the discount code interview for 10% off your purchase. That is it for this episode. Thank you again for listening, and I hope to catch you next time. Bye-bye.